are such a genuine gem, thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is the Evelyn Hartley case, Unsolved, or the babysitter who vanished. And this is one of the most frustrating cases I have ever covered. Not only were there witnesses who could have stopped this, there was evidence found and then later lost. There were statements that were made years later that could have helped immediately in this case, and it just seems like every single thing that they find out about this case and this poor girl leads farther away from the truth, and we may never know what actually happened to Evelyn. By the way, I post so much content like this, and I am posting so much this summer, so if you are interested in hearing these stories, then I would really appreciate your support by subscribing down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1953 in Crosse County, Wisconsin, and Evelyn Hartley was a 15-year-old young woman born on November 21st, 1937. She was born to parents Richard and Ethel Hartley and had 3 siblings, but one had actually previously passed of polio. The family had moved to La Crosse 3 years prior because her father had gotten a job at La Crosse University as a biology professor. Evelyn was a junior in high school. She was adjusting well. She was a straight-A student, and she was much more of the hardworking student type than the partying type. She would play piano, she would sing, she went on a couple of dates, but there was nothing too serious in the boyfriend department. But it also meant that she was very trustworthy. So when a coworker of Evelyn's father's asked if she could babysit, he was absolutely sure she would do a wonderful job. This coworker's name was Rasmussen, and he had a 7-year-old daughter as well as a 20-month-old daughter named Janice. And that evening there was a huge college football game, and Vigo wanted to go with his wife and his 7-year-old daughter, but they of course didn't want to take the baby, so that's why they were hiring Evelyn to watch her. So on the night of October 24th, Vigo went over to the Hartley household to pick up Evelyn, because of course she couldn't drive yet, so he went over to pick her up at around 6:30 that evening. And the drive from Evelyn's house to the Rasmussen house was only about 5 minutes. So they drove there, and once they got there, they kind of instructed Evelyn on what to do, that the baby would go down at about 7 p.m. and then at 7:15 the baby would be covered with the blanket. They said they wouldn't be gone the whole night, but they were really excited for her to be watching this baby. Evelyn was such a hardworking student that she even brought her school books with her to this babysitting job because she knew she would basically just be watching a sleeping baby. But she also had promised her father at 8:30 p.m. that she would call him to just check in and make sure everything was okay. But that never actually happened. Her parents noticed right away and immediately began to be fearful because this was unlike Evelyn completely to not call when she said she was going to. And their fears worsened when they called the Rasmussen household and nobody was answering. They started calling neighbors around the area, asking if they had heard from Evelyn or seen her, and nobody did. And so her father got in the car and drove to the Rasmussen house. And it was about 9:20 when he got there. He noticed right away that the lights were on inside and that there almost seemed to be a radio playing, but nobody was answering the doors and they were locked. He looked in the living room window, which didn't have any curtains on it at the time. This was a completely different time. There was no curtains, no privacy really. Everyone was really open with what they had going on in their house. And he noticed that Evelyn's school books were scattered all over the floor in the living room. As he started to walk around the actual house, he saw that all of the windows were locked, all of the doors were locked, he couldn't get in, nobody was answering, until he got to the back. And that is when he would find a basement window that was open, and not only open, but the screen door was actually popped out and setting to the side of the actual house. Richard took this as an opportunity to head inside because he felt like something was really wrong, the fact that this basement window was open, and he noticed that there was a ladder actually heading down from the window, and so he climbed down that, and as soon as he hit the bottom step, he knew something was extremely wrong because one of Evelyn's shoes was at the bottom. As he rushed around trying to look for Evelyn, he noticed that in the living room, her other shoe was there, as well as a pair of her broken glasses, the books scattered everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. He then headed to the bedrooms where he found Janice, the little baby, asleep in her crib just fine. She wasn't covered, however, like Evelyn had been instructed to 15 minutes after she went to bed, leading them to believe possibly something happened to her in that time period. With no sign of Evelyn, Richard ran to the neighbor's house to call the police, and they immediately came and found more signs than her father Richard could have seen in his panic rush through the house, and that all the signs were leading to an abduction. Not only was the basement window open, but there were also pry marks on all of the other windows as though they had tried those first, and there was also footprints, like sneaker footprints, around this basement window in the living room, and there were pools of blood. One right outside the basement window and one next to a neighbor's house where there was also handprints found. Another neighbor's house had handprints kind of like smeared across the side as well, and when this blood was tested, it was type A, which was exactly what Evelyn's was. Nothing was stolen from the Rasmussen household, leading them to believe it was not a robbery. Now, this young woman was completely missing, and a search crew of 2,000 went to look for her. They were completely terrified in this community. It was one of the biggest searches in Wisconsin, and there was even a curfew implemented for teenagers to be home by 10 p.m. every evening. Now, Evelyn was a Caucasian female with brown hair and blue eyes who had glasses but wasn't wearing them when she disappeared. She was, however, wearing a size 34 to 36 plain white broadcloth ship-and-store blouse with pearl buttons and a size 16 heavy red denim white stag jeans with a side zipper and the cuffs rolled up above the ankle with white bobby socks. She stood at 5'7" and 126 pounds. Now, authorities' biggest theory as to what had happened, why they found pools of blood, was that she was drugged through the basement out the window and drugged through the yards of the neighbors, and the pooling was when the abductor had rested her on the ground to take a break. Now, tracker dogs were used, and her scent was traced up to 2 miles away northeast to a coulee drive where investigators believed she was then put in a vehicle. Now, because of this, police started searching cars in the area that were driving by. Every single car was searched for not only, suspicious behavior, the people, but also blood stains and anything that could lead to them being involved in this. And once their car was searched and it was completely okay, they got a sticker on the back of the car that actually said, "My car is okay." And investigators were told to pull over any car that did not have this sticker and search it. Gas station attendants were also told to look in every vehicle to make sure that anybody who was looking suspicious or anyone who had anything suspicious was called in to police. Over 3,500 people were interviewed in this, but still no sign of Evelyn. This was throughout a year-long investigation, and throughout that year, many tips would come in that would lead them to believe they were so close to the answer. One neighbor reported to have seen a light-colored car circling the neighborhood at around 8 p.m. Another neighbor said that they had heard screams at about 7 p.m. but just thought it was children playing and didn't go check. 2 days after Evelyn's disappearance, the biggest tip would come in that the investigators had seen thus far, and it was from a man named Ed Hoffer, who had been in the neighborhood around 7:15 when he almost hit a car. It was a two-toned green 1941 or 1942 Buick, which was headed westbound. 2 men were inside. One was driving and one was in the back seat with a woman who seemed slouched over with her head against the front seat. He had believed he had seen these 3 people staggering down the road a little while earlier, but he didn't think much of it because he thought that they were headed to the homecoming game, that they were probably drunk, and that he just didn't need to help them in any way. But this would in fact be the same road where the blood pools would be found. He had no idea yet that a woman had been abducted. I mean, through this investigation, there were even graves that were recently dug, who were dug back up again to make sure that Evelyn hadn't been placed there when no one was looking. There were helicopters searching the area, but there was literally no sign until 3 days after her disappearance. A pair of underwear and a bra were found that were in Evelyn's size near the underpass on Highway 14, which was 2 miles outside of La Crosse. And the weird thing was, when these undergarments were found, the day before they had searched that same area and found nothing. They were stained with type A blood, and so were a pair of pants found 4 miles down the same highway. On Halloween in Coon Valley, 14 miles away from La Crosse, even more evidence was found. Size 11 Goodrich sneakers were found blood-stained and appeared to have been dumped recently. The soles had a suction cup pattern which matched the footprints found at the crime scene, and there was also a human hair that was allegedly found in these sneakers. Investigators believed they had found a connection to Evelyn's abductor, and they actually went to the Goodrich company, the people who made the shoes, to get more information. They found that it was the hood mogul type of shoe, and that it was made and sold in Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois, but it had not been sold in Wisconsin for 3 years. Based on the wear pattern, investigators believed that this person had worked with machinery, and based on the circular pattern at the soles of the shoes, they concluded that they had also rode a Weezer motorcycle. And they also believed that 2 people had worn these shoes, the second being someone who was too big for them. They were actually too small for this person. Now, this was not the only thing found that Halloween. 800 feet from these shoes was a well-worn 36 denim jacket with metallic buttons. This jacket had been cut off at the bottom and re-hemmed with a white sort of fabric, and had been missing 4 buttons. It was blood-stained all over the place. Under the armpits, running the entire width of the jacket, was worn marks, almost like this person had worn a safety harness. Now, this also was smeared with type A blood, and at the crime scene they had found characteristics of denim. There were also baste fibers found in the pocket, which was from scrubbing brushes. And if this belonged to the killer, and if the shoes also went with it, they didn't necessarily match in size. You see, this was a pretty small jacket, and there were size 11 shoes. They believed that the different sizes between the jacket and the shoes meant that there could be 2 abductors in this case. But the way that the jacket had been cut made them believe that the person who had worn it was a steeplejack, or someone who would climb tall buildings to repair them. Investigators took the shoes and the jacket to 31 different communities in the area, showing around 10,000 people, but nobody said that they had recognized it, that it was worn by anybody that they knew. And then it would be another year until they would come up with a new plan, and this was in 1954. But the May of 1954, investigators decided to go to the local high schools, because Evelyn was at that age, she was 15 years old, and conduct lie detector tests on all of the staff and students. This was around 1,750 people, and they got through 300 of them before they were shut down by the school boards for basically doing something that wasn't quite right. The school boards didn't believe that they should be allowed to do this, and so they stopped after 300 people and didn't find anything. Police did have one pretty big suspect, who was serial killer Ed Gein, and he lived in Plainsfield, Wisconsin, and had confessed to killing 2 women. one of which was the same year as Evelyn had gone missing, but her name was Mary Hogan. Now, where Ed did all this was only 2 hours from La Crosse, and if you don't know about Ed Gein and everything that he did, he is basically one of the most horrific serial killers I've ever researched. He turned his victims into furniture around the house, and he was the inspiration for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I did a whole video on him. I'll have it linked down below if you'd like to see all that, but he was just a very gruesome person. But the reason they believed that Ed could have done this to Evelyn was because he did live so close and also had relatives in La Crosse that he was said to be visiting at the time Evelyn disappeared. Ed was caught in 1957 and confessed to killing the 2 women, but he was giving lie detector tests to ask about Evelyn to see if he was involved in her disappearance, and he passed both of them. He did 2, he passed both, and there was no trace of her at his home. And like I said, he liked to use his victims in many different ways. So it was not believed that there was much evidence against him. By this point, Evelyn was still missing and nobody really knew anything, and her reward had been upped to $6,600, and a documentary was coming out about her disappearance, which would actually lead to even more clues. It was in 1989 that this documentary came out, and afterwards 2 women had called in to the reporter and had wanted to talk to him about some possible information. These 2 women said that they believed that a local farmer had abducted Evelyn. They worked with this local farmer, and they said that he wore a jacket kind of like that, and that night she disappeared, he was talking about going into town to get himself a woman, and he was pretty agitated by the time 6:30 rolled around because they had worked late, and so he left at around 6:30 to go into town. And after that, they never saw him wear that jacket, wear the shoes, or drive the same car ever again. Unfortunately, this was pretty much a dead-end tip because the man had already passed away, and when they went to look for the shoes and the jacket once again, it had disappeared from evidence. It had been mislocated, and they couldn't do anything with it. Then it was the 50th anniversary of Evelyn's disappearance, and it was October 2003 when an anniversary special would come on about her. And that is when a man named Mel Williams would hand in a recording. It had been taken in 1968, an hour away from La Crosse in Lafarge, and it was at a bar, and Mel had gone in to kind of record the band that was playing there, but he in fact got a conversation that was insane, and it was between himself and a man named Clyde Pee Wee Peterson, and another man who had walked in later on named Whitey Barkley. And Whitey Barkley had told Clyde to tell Mel about the woman he had kidnapped named Evelyn. And he actually did. Clyde told Mel that evening he, a mutual friend, and his accomplice named Jack Gilfair had gone to La Crosse because Jack had known that Evelyn was babysitting that night, and they wanted to go and get her. Basically, they went into the house and they took Evelyn back to this mutual friend's farm where they killed her and buried her body. At this point in the recording, Clyde asked Mel to stop the recording, and having it be so far after that, Mel, who was a little bit older, couldn't remember what Clyde said after this, and they had no idea if this was true or not. The investigators didn't. And by this point of Mel coming forward, which he only did because they had seen the anniversary special and his wife reminded him of the recording, by this point Clyde was already dead. Jack had committed suicide, the mutual friend was dead, and Whitey Barkley, who was at the bar with him as well, had dementia. Police said that they would look into this, but still nothing has really come of it, and I can see why if nobody involved really knows what went on and they're mostly passed away. But this case is still unsolved. Now, are you possibly wondering whatever happened to Janice, the little baby that was with Evelyn when she disappeared? Well, Janice grew up in a very protective household. After that, the Rasmussens, they moved house, they got completely out of there, and after that, I mean, the basement windows were barred up. Her father was extremely protective and almost even paranoid after that something was going to happen to his kids. And you could tell that it really, really affected that household as well as the Hartley household. Evelyn's parents felt extremely guilty because they had been the ones who told her to go babysit. She had wanted to stay home and work. And they told her, you know, it would be a good idea for you to do this for your dad's coworker. And so she did, and her mother felt extremely bad, especially because at around 7 p.m. that evening, her mother got this gut instinct that something was very wrong, and when she went to call Evelyn, her husband told her, no, she's going to call at 8:30, let her do her thing, she'll be fine, she'll call later. But of course we know she never really did. You know, my biggest question is, how did somebody know Evelyn was there? Because this was her first time babysitting for them. The Rasmussens had a completely different babysitter most of the time, but she also wanted to go to the game, and so she couldn't babysit, so Evelyn took her place. So does that mean that this was a mistaken identity? Was the person abducted supposed to be the other girl and not Evelyn? Or was someone at the university that these two men worked at, listening to their conversations, knew that Richard's daughter Evelyn was going to be babysitting and wanted to do something with her? Or was it possibly college students who knew that the professors were going to be at the game and decided to go to his house to maybe rob it, maybe do something horrible, and in fact, they came in contact with Evelyn, who they weren't expecting, and felt the need to take her life because she saw them? I do think that the farmer that the two women came forward about should definitely be someone that they regret not looking into, because I don't know, that story, if it is true from these witnesses, just seems so incredibly strange that he went out looking for a woman. That in itself tells you about his character. But unfortunately, there's not much they could do at this point with him. And the three men at the bar, I don't know, their story seems a little bit iffy to me. I think there were 3 men involved, as Clyde said, but the witness who'd seen the 2 men and the girl in the car said there were only 2 men, not 3. So was somebody else, you know, staying back? What happened in that situation? Could that have been why Jack committed suicide? Because he felt guilty about what he did? I have no idea, but something about their story just seems a little strange. But then again, that could mean that they were confessing because they were so old and didn't really care at that point anymore, and Jack was already dead, because they did blame him for the actual killing. And Ed Gein really doesn't seem like a suspect to me in this case. He liked to keep his victims, not hide them, so her body should have been there if he had been the one to do it. But like I said, this case is still unsolved so many years later, and it truly is baffling that so much information has come out about it, but still not the truth. So if you know any information, please contact the La Crosse Police Department at 608-785-5962. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.